All right, in this video we are going to talk about uh, bugs and debugging. Okay, so a bug is an error in a program. Okay, and so there are we're going to talk about basically three different types of bugs. The first one is called a syntax error. So a syntax error in a program makes it is an error that makes it impossible to parse and therefore impossible to compile. All right. So as an example of that, let's say I am going to print out a program. I'm going to write a program that computes the average of two numbers. Okay. So the average of is all right, and so there's my first line, and then I forget to put the semicolon, and when I hit the green plus, I get an error like this. All right, and so this is what's called a syntax error. That means the stuff that you typed in, the compiler can't really recognize it as a program, right? And with a syntax error, you're going to get a line number, right? Remember, you can turn the line numbers on by going to View in JGrasp and doing it that way. And then here it's going to tell you the line number 5, right, is where the error is, right here. And then it's even going to try to point to where where the mistake is. All right, and here it gives you a little message, right? The semicolon is expected. Another one that I do all the time is system.out.println. I forget the N, right? And so when I hit compile, then it says cannot find symbol, which means that it doesn't know what this is, okay, what this is referring to. And it's because I misspelled it, right? And here you can see it doesn't point to exactly where the N is, but basically Java is saying, hey, I'm good up till here, but after that, man, I don't know what this is, okay? And so put the N back in there, right, and compile, and you're good to go. All right, so that's a syntax error. It won't even compile. All right, so next up is what's called a runtime error or exception. So a runtime error or exception is when your program compiles just fine, right? You don't get any error messages when you compile, but then when you go to run your program, then your program doesn't finish. It does what's called crash, okay, in the middle of the program. So I'm just going to do a common thing that can happen. And we all know from math class, right, that you can't divide by 0. So I'm going to add a couple of lines to my program. And this one specifically to cause, right, a syntax error, or a runtime error, sorry. Okay. All right, so I'm going to compile it, and you're going to see I don't get any errors. So there are no syntax errors, right? Java is understanding what I'm typing in here with no problem. All right, but now I'm going to go to run it, and then you can see I get this. So line number 5 printed out okay, right? The average is. And then line number 6, Java said, okay, you want me to do this arithmetic problem? And then it realized, hey, wait a second, you're asking me to divide by 0, and I don't know how to do that. So Java basically just gives up, and it generates this message right here. All right. So with a runtime error, right, the program was running and then it crashed. You'll notice that line 7 was never executed. So Java just gave up right here, and the program did not run until completion. Okay. So with a runtime error, it will tell you, hey, what line this was caused on. And so we can see we get line 6 right here is the problem. All right, so we could go to line 6, right, and see, oh, okay, we tried to divide by 0. All right, so that's the problem, we could fix it, right, and do some other. Okay. And so now you can see, since we're not divided by 0, right, there was no runtime error or exception. All right, so that's an example of a runtime error or exception. It's some error that causes your program to crash. It compiles just fine, but when you're running it, something bad happens and Java quits running your program and it crashes. Okay. All right, and so then that brings us to the last kind of error, and that's what's called a logic error. A logic error is when your program has no syntax errors, right? So it compiles just fine, and then it runs to completion. It doesn't crash, right? But it just doesn't do what you wanted it to do, okay? So let's show you an example of that. So let's say that I want to find the average of 2 and 5. All right, so the average of 2 and 5. So to do that, right, to find the average of 2 and 5, I would add up 2 and 5 and then divide by 2, right? That's how you find the average of two numbers. Add them up, right, and divide by how many numbers you've got. In this case, it would be 2. All right, and so we know, right, if we do that, the average of 2 and 5 comes out to be 3.5, okay? All right, so let's run this. All right, so compile it. We get no errors, so no syntax errors. And then we go to run it, and we can see that our program runs to completion, right? All of these lines execute, but here we get 4, right, as the answer for the average. The average of 2 and 5 is not 4, right? And so that's what's called a logic error. A logic error means your program, has no syntax errors, no runtime errors, but it's not working right, all right? And so these are basically the worst errors, or the more difficult ones to figure out, because with a syntax error or a runtime error, you'll get a line number. Java says, hey, there's a problem on this line. But here we don't get anything. We just notice, hey, this is not right. So it's up to us now to go back and figure out, hey, what happened here? Why is this not running right? One of the issues, there's actually a couple of issues here. But anyway, that's the example of a logic error. The first issue is that with the order of operations, right? What's happening is in the order of operations from math class, right? PEMDAS, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, however you want to say it, right? That division gets done before adding or multiplication or adding here. So it's dividing 5 by 2 and then adding the 2. So that's one issue. We need to do the adding first, which means that the addition needs to be put in parentheses, okay? So add the 2 and the 5 first and then divide by 2. Before it was dividing the 5 by 2 and then adding the 2, which is incorrect, okay? All right, so that's our first attempt. But we're going to see that it still is not going to work right? So here, right, we know that the average of 2 and 5 is 3.5, okay? And we get 3, all right? So that's not right again. So again, there's still a logic error in our program, right? There's no syntax error, no runtime error. The program runs to completion, but it doesn't give us the correct, it doesn't do the thing it was supposed to do, which is print out the average of 2 and 5. All right, and the issue here is that is a slightly more complicated one that we'll talk about in chapter 2, but people constantly will make this mistake over and over again. So it's kind of good to me to point it out already. The point here, or what causes this error, is that none of these numbers, 2, 5, or 2, have a decimal point in them, right? In math class, we just write 2 instead of 2.0, right? And it doesn't make any difference in math class. However, in Java, right, if you leave off the 0.0 on these, right, then what Java will do is cut off the decimal place in the answer. It likes to see all of these are whole numbers, so Java says, okay, these are all whole numbers. Well, then what's going to happen is that the answer is going to be a whole number. So it chops off the 0.5 and makes the answer a whole number. To fix that, right, what you need to do is to at least put a 0.0 on one of these numbers here, okay? And now when I run it, you can see, right, that I get 3.5. All right, so you can see that the logic errors are harder to figure out, right, generally speaking, than the syntax errors or the runtime errors. That's not. I've had some syntax errors that were really, really difficult to find, incredibly difficult, in fact. But those were in older languages, not in more modern languages like Java. Okay, but still, they're just in general more difficult, the logic errors. Okay, I think that's it for this video. Oh, debugging, right? When we talk about debug or debugging, that is the process of finding and removing any of these three kinds of errors. All right, so now we're done on this one, and you should start working on programming assignment 1. If you have any questions, let me know.